Hi again. So I want to now go on to the next slide, and I want to speak a little bit more about Poggio. Poggio was born to a family which it's little is known other than domestic housekeeping, what his mother's name and position was, but it's thought that his father was a notary. And it's thought that Poggio was schooled in a town called Arezzo, and that he afterwards moved to Florence, where he became a scribe. And himself and many of a good group of his friends and colleagues at that time are really considered the creators of the foundational script, which would become what we call today italics. So he was really well known for his handwriting and for having really clear handwriting. And he copied books for money, and he stood examinations in front of lawyers and notaries. And eventually, over time, he ended up getting a recommendation from Salutati. And with this recommendation, he went to Rome, and he got a job as a scribe, and then eventually he got a job as the Pope's private secretary. When he was working in the Vatican as the Pope's private secretary, he wrote something called The Lie Factory, which is basically an entire book about jokes, quite witty jokes, and in some cases maybe cruel, but also very telling jokes about the monks and the priests at that time. And I've just included a short little excerpt here that shows Poggio's handwriting to see where it could be similar to italics nowadays. Next slide, please. So while Poggio was secretary to a number of popes, but one of the main ones that he was secretary to was a pope called Pope John the 23rd. Also in the book in Swerve, they refer to him more so often as Baldassare Cosa, who did not have the best reputation. And it was during Baldassare Cosa's time as pope that there was a division and a contestation of who was supposed to be pope, himself or others who claimed to be pope. And there was a council that was held in Constance, Germany, which is in southern Germany, and it was supposed to be determined at this conference and this council who was the real pope. There was a lot of talk back and forth. Ultimately, things did not end in Cosa's favor, and he ended up fleeing away to a nearby town, but he was found, and he ended up being charged with multiple accusations. Now, for Poggio, this meant being unemployed for a time period. And he was very well known as being a scribe, so he was able to still continue making money that way. This, I think, was really an exploratory time period for Poggio, because he was able in this time to not only do book hunting, but he was also able to experience for himself Epicurean life. One of the stories that the author goes into is Poggio visiting the baths in Baden, Germany, and how the women and the men were openly flirting with each other, not wearing very much, whining and dining each other at night, just overall living really happy lives geared towards their own pleasure, as Epicurean beliefs go. So he was able to experience that for himself. And then later on, he also uses this time to go book hunting, and it's in this time period which he's unemployed that it's believed that that's when he discovered the book on the nature of things in Fulda, Germany. Next slide, please. So then we get to a little bit of information about On the Nature of Things. And while I've been calling it a book, that's probably incorrect. It's actually a poem, and it's a poem that is made up of 7,400 lines. It's written in hexameters, which are actually unrhymed. It's unrhymed, and it has 6 beats per line. Initially, when Poggio discovered it in 1417, or rediscovered it in 1417, it wasn't necessarily taken all that well by everyone because of the stringent Christian beliefs in that time period. It was thought to promote atheism, Even though Lucretius himself did believe in gods, and he even states it in the book as well, he just doesn't believe that the gods would intervene in our lives. He didn't see any value in anyone going to pray or to make sacrifices because he thought that if the gods are indeed gods, then they're too far above us to have any concern about what goes on in our lives. So this would be the complete opposite of the Greek gods, which are dabbling in every single aspect of Greek god stories, I should say, who are dabbling in every single aspect of people's lives. Rather, he thinks that they're up there, they're doing their own thing, or I should say they're wherever they're doing their own thing, and they don't have any concern about us. So sacrifices, anything along those lines would be not logical in his opinion. Next slide, please. Elements of Lucretius' thoughts. These are all things that they mention in the book, in which we'll get more into in discussions. So Lucretius believed that everything's made of particles, that these particles are eternal. Particles are infinite in number but limited in shape and size. All particles are in motion in an infinite world, so without boundaries. The universe has no creator or designer. If I might prompt some future discussion, I thought this one was really interesting because of the fact that Lucretius does acknowledge gods, but among the elements of his thoughts is that there's no creator or designer. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Everything comes into being as a result of the swerve, which is only first mentioned on page 162. And the swerve is minimal motion that sets off chain reactions. Now, this is really interesting how it ties into the next line, which is that the swerve is the source of free will, because if motion were predetermined, there wouldn't be any possibility of freedom. Nature ceaselessly experiments. The universe was not created for or about humans. Humans are not unique. Human society began not in a golden age of tranquility and plenty, but in a primitive battle for survival, and the soul dies. Next slide, please. There is no afterlife. Death is nothing to us. All organized religions are superstitious delusions. Religions are invariably cruel. There are no angels, demons, or ghosts. The highest goal in human life is the enhancement of pleasure and the reduction of pain. The greatest obstacle to pleasure is not pain, it is delusion. And finally, understanding the nature of things generates deep wonder. We continue now to part 2 of the synopsis of the Swerve. Thanks so much.